Hey everybody, it doesn't take a particle physicist to realize that authenticated testing is going to give you better results, but I never really had any data on it. Well, recently, our CTO at NowSecure looked at about 100,000 different assessments. I think about 5% of them were authenticated and came up with a really interesting insight. You're about 78% more likely to find sensitive data exposures if you're doing authenticated testing. So I'm going to take you through some of the analysis real quick and then a live demo and just show it to you. Okay, I just put together a little deck to walk us through this. So the analysis data set, as I mentioned, there's about 105,000 scans, 5,000 of them were authenticated, and this covers both Android and iOS. Now, as I mentioned, and this is really the headline stat, that you're 78% more likely to find sensitive data exposures per scan. And that's like a stop the presses, wait a minute, a baseline or an unauthenticated scan is fine and it gets you some good coverage. But if you're that much more likely to find sensitive data exposure, well, then pretty much all of your scans ought to be authenticated. Now, here's some of the findings that you might find interesting. So depending on the particular type of finding, and we have over 500 findings, so there's a lot, and we pulled out a few here. But you can see that you have a higher detection odds, anywhere between 10 to 60 times. So for example, the username showing up in the logs, even though we tried to authenticate, so we did have a username, we did have a password, if you weren't successful in authenticating, occasionally we would find the username in logs. If you authenticated, we found the username 20% of the time. So that's a 42-time increase in your odds of finding that particular sensitive data exposure. And you can go through the rest of the list here, not just logs, but files, egresses over network, keychains, things of that sort. So much, much higher detection odds. So what's actually changing here? Well, we're going from obviously credentials that didn't work and were made up to real credentials. That generates all kinds of activity and code in the application. So what actually changes? Well, a lot. I mean, of course, first of all, you went from credentials that don't work to real credentials, but all of a sudden you're successfully logging in. So now we see network traffic, session tokens are generated. Parts of your API that are hidden behind authentication actually get exercised. And one of the biggies is third-party SDKs. Once you have active users authenticated, those SDKs, especially the ones that are collecting statistics or telemetry about your users, are going to find way more data being collected, and you're going to actually see that egress. So really important stuff. Now, it's important to emphasize, because we run into this from time to time of, hey, I expect to find more findings, more tests. And well, our testing engine's pretty comprehensive. We have over 520 different checks or tests that we do. We use the same testing engine. What's different? Well, the state of the application, the fact that you're authenticated and you get into more screens. So it's not necessarily if you were counting the total number of findings and you said, hey, I had 23 findings unauthenticated and now I have 32. Sometimes that happens. But a lot of times it's going to be that we get some basic telemetry and hits on a baseline and unauthenticated scan. But when you're authenticated, you're going to get a lot more instance of finding the actual issues that exist in your application. So what are the things that you miss with unauthenticated? Well, different data exposures that occur in runtime after you've been authenticated. Obviously, as we've seen, credential storage, where are you storing them? How are you storing them? How are you encrypting them? User metadata, where is it being transmitted? And then of course, anything that happens in the application that requires authentication, well, there's attack surface there. And so in order to test that dynamically, you have to be logged in. So I'm gonna leave my contact info here, but I'm actually gonna switch over and demo this live for a minute. So for this particular application, I did 2 different scans, and this is now inside the NowSecure portal. And here you can see I did a baseline scan, and that found 24 findings. And you can see here, as I mentioned earlier, we don't actually increase the number of findings. We did find additional things that I'll show you here in a minute that makes a huge difference. So this baseline scan didn't do well. The score didn't actually get worse, but what we did find was a whole bunch more instances of sensitive data exposures as an example. So what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to just come into this second report here and call this up. And one of the cool features that we have is you can actually come up here and compare different applications. So I'm going to go ahead and compare this. And since there's only 2 assessments, you don't even have to choose. You can actually choose. And I'm going to come over here and you can see we've got now 3 new findings and 30 of them have been updated. So you can come over here and say, hey, just show me the new findings. And here you'll see that for this particular application, we found that the first name leaked to the device log. So it's an entirely new finding that we didn't have previously. And then another one, and this is really interesting for developers and people on the product management or the legal side of it, is that more and more Apple and Google are requiring developers to talk about data safety. And so for this particular app, you have to declare different data safety types. And here there's a missing one because we were able to exercise the application. We were able to determine that there's actually a device ID that's being tracked. So you can come in here and see it's going to Firebase that was not found previously. So by exercising more of the application, not only did we find potential sensitive data exposures, and this one is through, you can tell a third-party SDK because it's going through Firebase, but we found something that was completely missing and may be really important to making sure that your app doesn't get blocked in the store. You can also look at all of the updated findings, and here you could see that there's a bunch of findings where we had those findings previously, but we now found more results that make, of course, the overall testing here more valuable. You can actually download this into a CSV file. You can dig into all the particulars, but just being able to look at the amount of data, when you come up here to our little shortcuts under privacy, in the baseline scan, I think it was, we had 18 PII observations. And here we have 42. So you can see that there's significantly more data, and this is all test data that we found. Another great example would just be overall network traffic. In the baseline scan, we got just a little bit of traffic, a couple of kilobytes. But here you can see when we're doing our TLS interception, we got 1.3 megs. And there's a lot more data that's being passed around here that we're able to collect. The last thing that I want to show you here is how do you actually configure this? So on a normal baseline scan, we're just going to try to log in with a default username and password. But you can actually come in here and configure what we call AI Navigator. So we just released this. We're super excited about it. But instead of having a bot that looks at different buttons and fills in names, we actually use vision-based LLM to detect the screens and make decisions. What we're finding is our ability to do authenticated navigation goes up significantly. So you get much better coverage of the application with a lot less work. So this is a really cool feature to be able to get better authenticated coverage of your applications with far less work. So I just wanted to wrap up by saying I was blown away when I saw the actual stats. 78% more sensitive data exposures is an absolute game changer. And using vision-based AI to better navigate the applications and get authentication makes this so simple. It's a no-brainer. If you're testing mobile apps or really any apps, you need to be doing authenticated testing. I'm just going to wrap up on this screen so you have my contact info. If you're interested in running this for an app that you've developed or you own, or maybe it's an important app to your company, just reach out to me. You can send me an email, connect with me on LinkedIn or Mastodon, and I'm not going to promise that I could get to everybody and always run your apps, but I'll do as best I can. And if you have an app that you're interested in, just contact me or go to Now Secure and contact us. We're more than happy to show you firsthand what a difference this can make in your app. All right, thanks so much for your time, and until next time.